Picture this. You're a normal girl living a peaceful life working in an apothecary, until one day, your freedom gets taken from you. The prince of this kingdom wants you as his concubine, so you flee to another nation, where you're rescued by a foreign prince. It's there, you decide to live in this new nation because you want to get to know him better. However, things wouldn't be so smooth since you're a commoner and he's royalty, so you try to find your own path working in the castle to be with him. And despite the class difference, he sees something special in you that makes his heart flutter. Will you two find a way to be together? Find out in the tale of Snow White with the Red Hair. Let's get started and watch this love story unfold. Wandering in a serene forest, a red-haired girl found the herb she was looking for, one that had roots when steamed and dried, that could be used to relieve fevers and pain. Hearing the large Tanburun kingdom bell chime, she had to hurry because it was time for the shop she was working at to open. She overlooked the beautiful town, knowing this was her path, her story. If she could have only one wish, it would be to always be in control of her own destiny. In the country's castle, the first prince, Raj Shenazard, questioned, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, in this land, who is the fairest maiden of them all?" However, his aide Sakaki tells him to stop playing around, because the man before them is clearly not a mirror, but rather an informant from town. Getting serious, the prince commanded the man to make his report, and knowing the prince was searching for the fairest maiden to wed, the man asked about that girl, the one with locks as red as an apple, named Shirayuki, meaning Snow White. At an apothecary, Shirayuki performed her usual duties, making and giving medicine, until a visitor on order of the prince came to let her know she'd been selected to become one of his concubines. Shirayuki was taken aback. She couldn't believe the prince would want a commoner like her just because of her hair color. However, the guard marched forward, telling her she was to report to the castle formally tomorrow morning, and that she would be allowed the night to ready herself. That evening, she felt certainly down, but she wasn't out yet. She began preparing medicine some of her local customers needed, regardless of the shocking news. Having finished it all, she had one last look of her hair in a mirror's reflection before she cut it. And that night, she left her ponytail by the windowsill before saying goodbye to the home she loved. She escaped on the back of a traveling merchant's caravan until she crossed the border into a new land, then wandered through a forest until she spotted a secluded home, but knocking on the door, no one responded. She didn't want to go inside without permission, but sitting down, it was getting dark and cold, and she was getting hungry as well. The next day, she woke up to a bird picking at her pistachios. Yawning, still not fully awake, she caught the eyes of a boy named Zen hopping over the wall next to her, but this actually caused him to fall over and hurt his wrist. The boy's friends then came over to check on him, and Mitsuhide asked him what 1 + 1 was, to which Zen answered right, but joked that he didn't remember Mitsuhide at all, and Kiki sarcastically got in on the joke as well. Shirayuki tried to escape being the awkward stranger to their friendship, so Zen stopped her to question who she was. She then nervously explained she was on the run trying to avoid running into people along the way, and Zen used this opportunity to lift her hood, remarking her hair to be peculiar. She then noticed Zen's injury and offered some medicine, but he denied it, knowing it could be poisoned. Trust isn't given so freely, and thus he told her to be on her way. She knew what he said was true, but then took his blade to smack herself, then applied her medicine to prove it wasn't poisonous. This made him drop his sword and break into laughter. Inside, she tended to his arm, and Zen explained that this house was definitely unoccupied and they all just happened to hang out here. He then questioned why she was on the run. However, this just made her slightly upset, so she decided to take a walk, but wondered why he was tagging along with her. The two enjoyed the feeling of mountains and forests. They felt it was refreshing how the time and air seemed to move differently here than in town. Shirayuki's hair then got caught in a tree, because she had a few strands longer than the rest of her hair. She asked Zen to cut it for her, however, he'd only do it on the condition she told him why she ran away. Zen was shocked the first prince of Tanburun had his sight on her as a concubine. Raj only wanted her because of her red hair. She might as well have been an apple he bought if she had done as he said. So she thought she'd have him grow tired of her strand by strand. That's why she left her hair behind. The prince really chuckled, but acknowledged she was right to leave that lowlife behind. He felt her red hair should be important to her, since red was also the color of fate. Perhaps it had caused her nothing but trouble now. However, he believed it was connected to something good. The two friends watching from afar noted Shirayuki to not seem very suspicious, but also that Zen seems to have taken a liking to her. Back at the house, Zen found a basket at the door and Shirayuki was in shock because the ribbon on it was the one she tied her hair in. Zen thought it was pretty crazy the sender was willing to cross the border just to get this basket to her. Knowing it was the prince, he'd probably ordered a full search for her, including a check of the border crossing records. Zen knows Raj's type. He was probably the kind of person that considered something his the moment he set his eyes on it, even if it was someone's freedom. Shirayuki then pulled out one of the apples from the basket. Noticing it was spoiled, she stared at it with an emptiness in her eyes, mentioning no one would want one like this anymore. Zen then walked over to her and pulled her arm up to him to take a bite out of the apple. With Mitsuhide and Kiki watching them, Shirayuki then apologized for being so gloomy. But then, Zen got serious and told her not to eat that apple, before he fell to the ground, getting caught by Mitsuhide's swift reactions. Shirayuki did a quick smell of the juices from the apple. Figuring out quickly Zen had been poisoned, she rummaged through her bag but there was no use. Nothing she had with her could cure Zen. Then, the guard she had first met appeared, surprised she wasn't the one who ate the apple. However, he'd only hand over the antidote if she came with him quietly. In a lodging nearby, the prince was pleased with himself that his prize came. All Shirayuki was interested in was the antidote, but Raj continued babbling, going on about how when she fled his attempts to court her, he became the laughingstock of every town and even the royal palace. So, he decided to basically gaslight her into clearing his name by having her become his concubine. Still, she prodded him about the antidote. However, he'd only agree if she nodded to his request. Otherwise, he'd feed Zen another apple. And seeing it fall from the prince's hands, Shirayuki thought back to Zen's words of the color red being tied to fate. The prince then came up to touch her hair, and she slapped it away, but agreed to be his concubine. There was no need, however, because Zen stormed in saying he objected. He then crossed blades with the guard, and quickly defeated him. He didn't want Raj to sully Shirayuki's ears with any more dirty jokes. She then ran up to Zen, worried about his condition, but he assured her he had been slowly building up an immunity to poisons for a situation like this. Prince Raj, with a mocking tone, then said, "So you are the one who was poisoned. Oh, that was unfortunate. I was planning on immobilizing Miss Shirayuki and taking her home with me." Zen then made a rude comment, frustrating Raj, making him flaunt his superior social status. However, Zen had a secret to flaunt of his own, presenting the royal crest on his scabbard. He introduced himself as the second prince of Clarines, Zen Wistalia, putting Raj into a state of shock. Shirayuki thought Zen might be hallucinating, asking him what 1 + 1 was. But Zen was serious, and he never imagined a prince from a neighboring kingdom would poison him. Zen walked forward, and Raj fell back into his seat. Zen then made a deal. Raj's actions of poisoning him wouldn't be made public as long as he swore to never approach Shirayuki or utter her name again. Zen then simply lifted his sword up, and Raj tumbled back, but desperately swore to their promise. Later, while Prince Zen drank his antidote, Shirayuki thanked him for everything he had done to help her. He then came up to her, believing they must have been brought together by fate, and offering his hand, he felt the only path she should follow is the one she chooses for herself. After eating breakfast at the inn she was staying at, Shirayuki decided to look for a job, wandering the bustling kingdom of Clarines. Gardener, painter, none of the jobs that needed applicants seemed desirable. She tried stopping by a local apothecary to take on work like her last place, but they weren't hiring. And wow, it was stocked with an array of rare herbs she couldn't get back home. She then spotted a boy who the shop owner noted to be a very well-respected court herbalist. He then whispered to her saying, "Only the most skilled and knowledgeable herbalists can work for the court. Clarines is a country that promises generous patronage to talented individuals." He then handed her a flyer with some information about becoming a court herbalist. If she could pass the annual exam, she'd be able to work at Wistal Castle as an apprentice. Later, she decided to show up at Wistal Castle, where the guards immediately recognized her as one of Prince Zen's guests. And he was already climbing on top of the gate to see her. He snuck out when he should have been doing work, but he was just excited since it's been a little bit since the two had last seen each other. Their flirting was so obvious, the guards even began to blush. Then, hearing Mitsuhide was searching for him, the two ran off because Shirayuki planned on leaving the city. Riding a caravan, she detailed wanting to head to Mount Koto, a mountain beyond the sea where Shirayuki could collect a ton of herbs to rebuild her stock and study more about medicine. This was suggested to her by the town herbalist. Even though she already had worked as one, there was still a lot she didn't know. Overlooking the shining water against the kingdom, Shirayuki had already grown to love this country. Reaching the port town, Shirayuki asked why Zen snuck out of the castle so often, since in Tanburun, Prince Raj always ordered his servants to bring him whatever he wanted to the castle for him. He'd even throw a fit when he didn't get what he wanted. Zen then brought up what she said earlier about the beauty of the kingdom. He felt the country was full of wonders that have yet to be discovered, so he desired to see and learn more. Shirayuki then smiled, knowing good herbs are needed for good medicine, and good land is needed for good herbs. She wanted to learn more about this land and the herbs that grew here. She felt that both of them were similar in that respect. The two then said their goodbyes for now as Shirayuki took the boat to Mount Koto. Zen overheard some men talking about the red-headed girl who would fetch a pretty penny, provoking his wrath. On Shirayuki's end though, the herbs seemed plentiful, but she was quickly knocked out by someone looking to profit off of her. Back at the castle, Zen was full of vigor during his sword training session, thanks to the time he spent with Shirayuki. Kiki then told him to use some of that vigor to take care of his paperwork. And with him thinking of how hard Shirayuki was working, he was motivated to work just as hard himself. Unbeknownst to him, Shirayuki found herself tied up, with this man named Mihaya being the culprit who kidnapped her. He planned on selling her, knowing many of noble status would love to purchase someone with beautiful hair like hers. The next day, Zen visited the inn Shirayuki was staying at, but she hadn't returned, so he got on his horse and made his way to Mount Koto. Mihaya brought some food to her cell, and when he set it down on a barrel, she knocked it over and broke out of the rope she had spent all morning slowly undoing. She pulled the rug from under Mihaya and found her opportunity to lock him in the cell, making her escape. Running all over the building, she discovered the doors were locked, and Mihaya stood on the floor above her, taunting her with the keys she needed to escape. She ran away from him, only to get trapped at a dead end. However, Mihaya wasn't prepared for her to unleash some paralyzing gas she had quickly prepared, which caused him to fall over. She then ran to the upper floors. Finding a window she jumped out of, planting front-wise onto the ground, and somehow, Mihaya had made it outside. He threw Shirayuki against the wall and told her there was no escape, and even if she did, someone else would just come after her. She'd be better off if she just gave herself up to some noble. However, when she denied his claim, saying she'd choose her own life, he attempted to strike her with his torch, only for Zen to come in and save the day. After Zen easily beat Mihaya down, he turned to check on Shirayuki. Mihaya was disappointed she already had a guard, since his plan was to take up that position after he sold her off to some noble. Unaware the man before him was actually Prince Zen. This place Mihaya lived in was once a beautiful villa from when he was still a noble himself, but his social status and family name was gone. Back in town, Mihaya was being taken away, but through Shirayuki's kindness, she offered him some medicine she made. This is when he turned to ask her where the place was she truly wanted to stay, before being taken away. The next day, Zen was still in a bad mood, so Shirayuki turned him her way. She wanted to thank him, and this soothed his heart. He was angry at himself for not being there initially. He then asked what her answer was to Mihaya's question, so she responded that she chose to stay in this country because she wanted to see how he lived his life here. Zen then took her hand, wanting to thank her as well, and the two stared longingly at each other. Shirayuki woke up from her tireless studying, but still raring to go, she continued. Later in the morning, she headed to the castle on a request from Mitsuhide and Kiki. Being curious about the thing the man before her had on his neck, one of the guards showed identity tags that were required by everyone who worked at the castle. Although, being Zen's special guest, she wasn't required to have one. Walking alongside Mitsuhide in the castle, there was one man, Marquess Haruka, not particularly happy to see her given she possessed no proof of her social standing. He detested her friendship with the prince. We learned Mitsuhide had requested her to see Zen because he'd been holding himself up in his office with a ton of work. When she entered, he could hardly even believe it was her. Mitsuhide teased him, because he once said, "If I have time to sleep, it's better spent with Shirayuki," making him totally embarrassed. She didn't want to make things awkward, so she was going to take her leave, but then Zen quickly got up to stop her. Since he was almost never at the castle, his work was piling up. He'd been putting in double time. That way no one could complain the next time he decided to be away. He didn't actually mind desk work. It's just he felt the real kingdom of Clarines was beyond the castle walls, where he truly desired to be. With him yawning, Shirayuki asked if he wanted to nap, and agreed to stay watching over him until Mitsuhide came back. She then placed a blanket over her sleeping prince, and knowing he'd been working hard, she felt more determined to strive for her own goals. So, she decided to crack open her apothecary book to study more, all while someone was spying on them from beyond the window. After Zen woke up from his rest, he noticed Shirayuki left her book behind. He'd definitely need to return it later. Then suddenly, Haruka came to scold the prince, with specific regards to one red-headed woman in particular. Inviting a no-name town girl to the castle could hurt his reputation, and he assumed she'd start having expectations of the prince, and would eventually take advantage of him. Zen challenged this, questioning what Haruka would think if Shirayuki were able to prove her worth. Haruka was extremely skeptical, but if she were able to, then by all means he'd accept her. Outside of Zen's room, believing the prince to be too stubborn, Haruka could only count on his hired hand, Obi, to deal with the girl. While looking at some herbs, Shirayuki wanted to double-check them in her encyclopedia, only now realizing she must have left it back at Zen's place. Leaving the castle gate, she overhears Obi telling the guards her entry has personally been rescinded by the prince, showing them an official document. But since she'd already been let inside, the guards asked Obi to let the prince know about this. Obi spotted her as she ran into the castle. She couldn't believe the prince would really give such an order, but she had to know why for herself. She always knew that she relied on Zen's power to enter the castle, which was why she was aiming for a path that allowed her to be with him using her own. While sprinting her way to Zen's room, Obi shot an arrow that stuck right into the wall. It contained a message that read, "Red-haired visitor, take not another step forward and leave at once." She now knew she was being warned not to go near the prince, and that there was someone in the castle who really didn't want the two of them to be together. But her lack of care for the warning certainly surprised Obi. Watching her continue to run, he was about to make her meet her end. However, he stopped because Zen appeared. He could tell something was going on and asked about the arrow she was hiding behind her back. Learning all the details, he questioned why she didn't ask the guards for help. He was concerned for her safety, and while she was certainly scared, she felt like talking to the person who wanted to separate them was the best way to get through this. So, Shirayuki decided to confront Haruka herself, and he drew his blade at her, claiming he was bound to stop the advance of any intruder in the castle. He played coy, pretending not to know who she was, and that since she didn't possess the requisite social status to receive an invitation from someone here, he demanded she leave. She then challenged this anyways, taking one step forward, which forced Haruka one step back. And as she kept walking, he then sheathed his sword. On top of a tree outside, Obi clapped. Truly amazed, Shirayuki charged head-on. Seeing Mitsuhide and Kiki were below to ensure things went smoothly, Obi explained everything. Prince Zen then appeared, explaining he oversaw the whole thing, but understood Haruka was just doing all this in his best interest. However, he scolded the Marquess, telling him Shirayuki's presence was important for him to understand a perspective other than one who is of noble class. After dismissing Haruka, Obi was next to deal with, now being assigned to serve Zen personally moving forward. Obi had even taken a personal liking to Shirayuki, and this annoyed Zen enough to drop him off the ledge. But Obi easily landed safely. The next bit of news was this application Shirayuki was submitting. She was applying to become a court herbalist. That way, she could pass through the gates on her own and become someone Zen could rely on. Zen found this reassuring and would be waiting for her. Just like I'm waiting for you to like this video and subscribe to my channel. How long are you gonna make me wait? Come on. Here at My Shoujo Weekly, I've got plenty of fun stories for you involving romance, action, and drama. Ooh, I love drama. I also live stream weekly, where I yap about interesting topics and play games with you. So please, join your boy T, subscribe to me. In the office of the chief pharmacist of Clarines, Garrick, she observes a submission documented under one of her subordinates, Ryu. Thinking this round of applicants would be interesting, walking up the steps towards the testing area, Shirayuki mentally prepared herself for the day's tests. In front of the orientation room, a proctor told all the examinees they'd be waiting until everyone arrived. So Shirayuki decided to take this opportunity to observe a field of herbs. There, she spotted Ryu, a court herbalist she had seen at the pharmacy the other day. Seeing her red hair, Ryu began to blush, thinking of beautiful flowers. He was aloof, knowing those flowers were on the list to pick, but was waiting to collect them at sunrise, when their medicinal properties would be at their peak. Shirayuki got up close, eager to learn from him, and his response was to quickly pick up his stuff and scurry away. Zen spotted her and came down to ask if she felt ready for the exam. Her response was, kinda, as she grabbed his hand and fired herself up. In the orientation room, Garrick informed the examinees this exam would test their ability to manage herb gardens and medical storehouses, which are the primary responsibilities of any apprentice court herbalist. Anyone who qualifies would be responsible for a small medicinal herb garden in the castle, where they tend to and protect the garden's environment and plants. There would be an inspection in 2 days, after which they'd submit a report. In her greenhouse, Shirayuki learned they used aqueducts to spread water throughout the garden. It's extremely efficient. Noticing some dirt pass through the water, she decided to look into it, all while Zen was observing her. He heard someone rustling through some bushes and took a wary stance, slowly backing into the greenhouse. Although dropping his guard once Shirayuki spotted him, he tried to warn her not to come his way, but by stepping forward, the person in the bushes had locked them inside. Shirayuki wasn't too concerned though, knowing since there'd be an inspection in the morning, someone would let them out if they waited. However, she wanted to know what he was doing here. That's when he decided to make every excuse in the book, such as he just wandered here. Looking around, Shirayuki noticed some herbs beginning to wilt. Knowing this shouldn't be possible given the sublime conditions, she then tasted the water, astonished to learn it was sweet. She determined there were toxins in the lower aqueduct that only affected herbs and plants. She thought back to her studies and realized these pink flowers were the source of the cause. So, she enacted a plan where Zen would close off the aqueduct while she replanted these flowers correctly. The two worked together throughout the night until everything was made perfectly right. And with the chief coming in, she spotted the exhausted prince and Shirayuki, who had fixed the entire garden. Hearing the two had worked together, the chief began cracking up. Knowing the two had such earnest feelings towards one another, she granted Shirayuki an official court herbalist title because, as it turns out, this whole thing was a test designed by Ryu, and she'd be assigned as his subordinate moving forward. Meeting him later, Shirayuki presented him some herbs as a gift, to which he began grinding up. Later, someone with stomach pains insulted Ryu for being a creepy kid who was obsessed with poisons, and this pissed Shirayuki off into defending him, wanting the man to apologize. Ryu told her there was no need for that, and she responded he was stupid for saying that. This left Ryu astonished, making the prince wonder if that was his first time. Ryu wondered if she was mad at him, because he for some reason had a hard time understanding people. The bit of advice the prince told him was to just ask her directly before he took off. Where Shirayuki was, the chief handed her books of Zen's medical records. Inside, she learned Zen had greatly suffered for several hours after consuming her poisoned apple, and this brought her to tears. Ryu had witnessed this and ran to the prince, who was in the middle of sword training, to explain the situation. Zen came to her side, realizing she now knew the truth he kept from her, and he held her close, telling her he'd stay until she was done looking at his records. Afterwards, she ran to Ryu to thank him, smiling brightly. On another day, Shirayuki is accompanying the gang on a distant trip. She must study for her court herbalist duties, while Zen and the rest have to do a fort inspection that he's in charge of. After dropping her off, the gang is surprised to see no one at the fort is on watch. One of the fort men, Shuka, came running out, stumbling over looking like a complete mess. This is where we learn the true reason Zen has come for inspection. Regular reports stopped coming back to the capital. Obi then jumped down from above, having already stealthily infiltrated and observed everyone inside the fort to be fast asleep. Gaining only more curiosity, Zen decided to move forward, despite Shuka warning him the place had been plagued by a deadly evil spirit. It's been like this for the last 24 days. One by one, everyone started complaining about feeling strange sensations, saying their bodies felt like lead or their eyesight was going dark. Many lost their sense of balance, and the physician also fell sick while tending to the ill. Shuka continued to worry for Zen's safety. However, Zen told him he could rest while he continued to research. The first notable thing of interest was that the armory was empty, and the foreman had no idea why. Obi believed this had to be the work of bandits, and thought it best they start hunting. Kiki then decided the person with the best expertise on this would be Shirayuki. She might be able to determine what ails the soldiers. Shirayuki's first order of business is bandaging up Shuka and telling him to rest. Outside the door, she and Zen began arguing because she wanted him to get fresh air. That way he wouldn't get sick at all, but he didn't want to leave this just to her alone. Mitsuhide objected though, because Zen's mission was to only observe until sunset. So, Zen apologized and accepted he needed to take a break. While Zen was cooling off outside, Mitsuhide lightly praised him for keeping his stubbornness in check. He understood Zen's concern for Shirayuki, but believed those same feelings could be put towards depending on her. That night, after putting more firewood in, Shirayuki mentions to Shuka how she still hasn't figured out the problem yet. She reports that while everyone shows symptoms, they're all different from one another. Getting up, she suddenly collapsed. Distraught, because the symptoms shouldn't be affecting her so quickly, she wondered if the cause was in this room. Then, looking at the burning fire, that's when it came to her. She came outside to show Zen that the firewood in the fireplace was the cause behind this whole thing. The action of burning it releases harmful particles that affect the body. She then explained that a band of travelers who claimed to have needed to lighten their load handed their excess wood to the foreman. And seeing how hard Shirayuki worked, Zen came up and praised her, but asked her to serve the soldiers until they recovered. After a few days, with her help, the soldiers recovered back to health. She worked tirelessly for days, to the point of nearly passing out. Luckily, Obi was there to catch her before she fell. Moving quickly, she told Obi not to tell anyone about this. However, he responded that he had no obligation to her, so she told him she'd owe him one then. However, Zen ended up learning on his own that she hadn't been sleeping. After the soldiers reported she'd been serving them medicine 24 hours a day, he went to her room, telling her to sit on the bed. Then, he had her close her eyes for the count of 60 seconds. He counted aloud only 3 seconds, until she passed out. Touching her hair, commenting softly at how pale she looked, he wished she had said something. Returned to where the bandits who delivered the toxic wood were cheering, excited to make a lot of money off the stolen goods, but shocked to see the prince and his gang. One of the bandits tossed a bottle, but Zen easily slashed it apart. They then got to fighting, easily taking out bandit after bandit after bandit, not struggling on the side of good at all. Shirayuki woke up to Zen's return. He apologized to her for being slow to notice she wasn't feeling well. He asked for her help, but didn't pay enough attention to her. Still though, he wished she would have asked for help. That way, he could have come up with a solution where she didn't have to push herself. He didn't want her to hide a problem like this ever again. He wanted her to take care of herself as well, but still, he was thankful she took care of everyone and glad she was here as he lightly kissed her hand. He praised her for being his strength, and she told him he was hers as well, and that he'd been her strength countless times since they'd met. The two stared at each other with longing looks into the night. And the next day, while Zen and the gang took their leave, the fort soldiers gave them a huge send-off thank you. On another day in the castle, as Shirayuki heads to her court herbalist duties, Zen stops her to say good morning, but immediately blushes seeing her in uniform. He learned she received her official entry tags, and has since been officially moved into the castle. While the two gave their flirtatious goodbyes, someone had been watching them in secret. Zen was busy with tons of paperwork since the fort incident. Walking through the halls, Kiki noticed the guards were stationed differently for some reason, with a lot more in this area than usual. Zen suspected something was going on, so he hurried somewhere only to be stopped by some guards, who wouldn't answer why he couldn't pass. He was eventually invited to meet with his older brother, Izana, the crown prince of Clarines who had returned from his trip. In a serious tone, Zen asked why Izana didn't let him know about his return, to which Izana responded he was curious to see how well Zen kept track of affairs within the castle. All while unbeknownst to Zen, Shirayuki was ordered to listen in from the curtains in the side of the room. Izana was questioning why Zen didn't punish the fort soldiers for their incompetence, and to Zen's surprise, he was relieved from overseeing the fort for the next half year, and that he would be punished if the soldiers there couldn't maintain it without his help. This definitely upset Zen, but he accepted it. So, Izana moved on to the next order of business, revealing Shirayuki behind the curtain and dismissing everyone else from the room. Zen then quickly went over to her, knowing his brother was trying to test his patience, but telling her he'd come see her soon. Then, after staring at her face to face, he was ready to take his leave. This was the one action that seemed to please Izana. Shirayuki then asked why she was brought here. Learning Izana just wanted to observe his little brother's relationship with her, he learned Zen really liked her. Because why else would a prince make friends with a commoner and bring her into the castle? News like this would make many turn heads, including himself, so he suspected she must possess something that Zen values greatly. Shirayuki claimed she didn't think so, which disappointed Izana, and thus he dismissed her, claiming if her words were true, then maybe Zen brought her here because of her unusual red hair, and hearing this really shook her. She ran out, clearly upset, now developing an insecurity. We see Raj at the gates of Clarine's castle, yearning to leave because of his previous interaction with Prince Zen and Shirayuki. His aide, Sakaki, reminded him he couldn't, having been invited by Prince Izana so that their two nations would further their relations today. However, with the gates open, he was distraught to see Prince Zen being the first to greet him. Zen gracefully introduced himself, politely saying this was the first time they had met, and Raj played his princely part as well, responding in kind. Mitsuhide and Kiki never imagined Izana would invite Raj after trying to make Shirayuki his concubine and attempt to poison her. This all happened right after he personally met her. They wondered what the purpose of this was. The party moved to the garden, and Shirayuki was curious how things were going, so Obi took her along the way to do some personal scouting. They made their way behind some bushes, where they could finally hear conversations. With Izana bringing up Shirayuki to Zen, Prince Raj started spitting out his drink, nearly choking having to recite her name. Izana claimed that if Raj still had feelings for her, he'd be more than willing to hold a banquet for the two of them, saying perhaps she harbored feelings about returning to her home country. This angered Zen enough to shout at him. Watching this put an ache in Shirayuki's heart, she decided to escape with Obi, now fixated on the idea that Izana might want her to leave Clarine's. She questioned if she had no use here. Things were still awkward at the party, so Zen prompted Raj to respond, to which he nervously but gratefully declined. He played his part well, bombastically claiming he was not swept away by Shirayuki, and in fact, saw her off with a smile when she declared she'd live in another country, even claiming he had feelings for her to be preposterous, making both the princes look at him like he was stupid. But then, Prince Izana questioned if there was a particular reason Raj no longer wanted to see her, giving him PTSD flashbacks to Zen threatening his attempts to poison her. Prince Raj then claimed a little birdie had told him Prince Zen was considering taking Shirayuki's hand in marriage. And it seems no one was expecting to hear this kind of news. Raj frantically looked around at the situation he only further made awkward, then getting pulled away by Zen and slammed against the wall. Raj knew he blew things out of proportion, but felt the ends had justified the means. Since he thought Zen and Shirayuki were in love, Zen denied this, but it only brought further problems for Raj. Since Shirayuki wouldn't be able to justify remaining by Zen's side, she knew about the poisoned apples, so Raj needed to know where she'd reside. And if Zen kept claiming he had no intentions on marrying her, it was clear Izana preferred she'd be with Raj. However, Zen responded, "Over my dead body," and walked off. He went back to the party to let his brother know he had yet to consider a marriage with Shirayuki, and this was all a misunderstanding. Izana said nothing in return. The evening came, and with Shirayuki walking out of work, she wondered if she was going to be forced to leave with Prince Raj. She didn't have a true answer yet for why she was allowed to be near him, or what she should do from now on, and why she should be allowed to stay here. A flock of birds flew past her, and she remembered why she came to this country. She wanted to see how Zen lived his life here. She ran through the gates looking for Zen, but he was already gone. She then began her walk back, but Zen stopped her because he was actually on the floor above. She climbed up a tree and Zen pulled her over. She then went into his arms to embrace him. He asked if something happened, and she responded, "Kind of," so he held her tight. She faced forward and recited her dreams in her heart, over and over, but now by his side, she wondered what she should be to him. Zen asked if it was something about his brother. Shirayuki believed Izana was warning her to be conscious of Zen's status. He then understood why Izana was goading him, and apologized because his older brother was the one he couldn't be angry with. Shirayuki understood, and even if Izana had hurt her feelings, she wouldn't want Zen to beat him up. but I would." Zen sighed, wishing he had never let go of her, which made Shirayuki blush. He then started talking about his relationship with Izana, about how his older brother was always one step ahead of him. When Izana had turned 17, he requested a castle be built on the border of 2 domains that had infamous lords that were constantly feuding. The court asked if he was looking to mediate things between them, but he claimed it wasn't anything like that, only that it seemed like a place fitting for a castle to be built. Zen really didn't understand what his brother was trying to achieve by doing this. However, when Izana started having the castle built there, the 2 lords started sending him tributes so that he may fund construction. Afterwards, retainers from the 2 lords came to meet with him in secret, admitting the 2 lords had been demanding more contributions from the people for the funding of his castle. They begged Prince Izana to stop. However, the prince was stern, telling them to go beg their masters. Rumors spread about Izana amongst the castle, and people speculated this was all a game to him. Zen was disappointed in his older brother, hearing the 2 retainers had been fired, but this was all a part of Izana's plan. He took Zen with him to meet each of the domain lords, explaining that he heard they'd been heavily taxing their people in order to curry favor with him, making each lord nervous. Izana eventually gathered enough evidence for the 2 lords' misdeeds and removed them, stating that lords who weaken their own people deserve to be disposed of swiftly and silently. He then appointed the 2 former retainers as the successors to the domains, and returned the vast amount of tributes he received. Izana hadn't spent a single coin of it. This was a valuable lesson for Zen. His brother wanted to show him that if he didn't make the people recognize him as the son of a king, then he wouldn't be aware of it himself. Zen knew Izana had what it takes and deeply respected him. He wanted to stand proudly beside his older brother. The tale went into the evening, so Zen walked Shirayuki back. He stopped along the way to tell her Raj had said the 2 of them were engaged. He knew now that a lot of people would have their attention towards her, but all Shirayuki could think was how relieving it was that she had a purpose to remain here. Zen then held her in close, telling her to continue following her chosen path. There would be times where it wouldn't be so easy, and times where she wished she could quit, but he'd always be there for her. Spending his second day at the Clarion's castle, Prince Raj was still nervous, but displayed his flamboyant manner of speaking as a form of bravado. He tried to decline any additional tours, only learning he had no choice, since this was at the request of Prince Izana. So, he pulled his aide aside to tell him to scout ahead, and make sure Shirayuki was nowhere near them. So, as he got a tour of the pharmacy building, Sakaki would inspect every room ahead of them, while Raj would continuously praise the magnificence of the facility. Along the way, he started getting a stomachache from all the stress he'd been feeling. Sakaki told him he should have said something. However, Raj didn't want to appear weak to the people of Clarines. So, Sakaki decided to go retrieve medicine for him. With Shirayuki having a vial to deliver, the people amongst her in the castle spoke in hushed whispers about her potential relationship with Zen. Zen then decided to meet with his brother, who wanted to sword spar with him while they chatted. While Izana casually staved off Zen's strikes, Zen asked why Izana treated Shirayuki like a nuisance before getting to know her. Izana could already tell Zen had fallen for her, but knew there were plenty of girls with higher standing. The people around them would expect more out of a woman than just having red hair. He warned Zen that once they realized that's all that made her special, the people would turn on him. Izana finding an opening to make a decisive strike, Zen held his ground, saying that Shirayuki did an exceptional job at shattering preconceived notions. Izana then withdrew, describing that trait of hers to just be annoying as he walked away. Zen then stabbed his wooden sword into the ground, frustrated and unwilling to waver. Elsewhere, Raj was still in pain, waiting for his medicine, spotting Shirayuki as she was walking through. The 2 of them looked astonished. He played off his pain, remarking she was working quite hard here. He tried to leave only to kneel in pain. Shirayuki tried to check on him, and he spotted the vial she was carrying. He attempted to drink it, thinking it was the medicine he requested, only for her to slap it away as she explained it was a topical medication for wounds. Shirayuki scolded Raj, telling him he needed to take responsibility for his own well-being, and that she wanted him to become a man she could proudly call the prince of her homeland. That was her wish. As someone from Tanburun, Prince Raj was surprised to learn how she felt, but when his aide arrived, the 2 took off to retrieve the medicine, and from above, Prince Izana had seen the whole thing. He still felt she was more suited for Prince Raj. However, she had no intention of going back. nor would she avert Izana's gaze, until he surprised her with a kiss? But still, Shirayuki wouldn't back down because this was the country she met Zen in. Later, as Raj took his leave, Shirayuki's words had a deep impact on him. He left with grace, looking to better himself as a prince. On another day, Zen is trying to figure out how to deal with the other nobles talking about his and Shirayuki's relationship. Fearing she may be in danger, he gives Obi the task of being her personal retainer, and even though he's reluctant, given he once tried to assassinate her, Obi goes along with it. Kiki escorted him to Shirayuki, letting her know she was allowed to be as insistent, forceful, and thorough as she liked to get the most out of him, and that she could also return him to Zen anytime she wished. He decided to help her and Ryu pick some fruits that secrete something that can intoxicate humans, and reflexively, he pulled her face cover away, unsure of why. Maybe it was to have a close look at her beautiful face. Walking to where they had to store the fruit, Obi asked if she ever thought it might be better if Zen wasn't a prince. She wanted him to stop talking, taking that as an insult. All the while above them, Zen had overheard their little conversation. Obi and Shirayuki had a glass of the fruit juice, which had been fermented for over 6 months. Turns out, it became alcohol and Shirayuki couldn't handle it at all. In Zen's office, while he tried to work, Obi's question weighed on his mind. It brought him back to his youth, when Prince Izana presented Mitsuhide as his personal aide. He was initially cold towards Mitsuhide, thinking he'd rather serve his older brother, and would often escape off on his own. In a private part of the castle, Zen would often meet with his good friend Atori, a commoner and an archer who would often rough it up with him. When Mitsuhide would call for the prince, Zen would try to keep his friendship with Atori a secret, without knowing for some reason, Atori had a deep, hateful look in his eyes. Mitsuhide had always known about the friend, given his perceptive talents. Zen continued to deny it though, given he was not allowed to make friends. At the time, he had told Mitsuhide he was nothing more than an aide to him, so he should keep his mouth shut. But this really hurt Mitsuhide's feelings, so he called Zen out for it. Realizing the weight of his words, Zen ended up apologizing. In Mitsuhide's eyes, he knew Zen was incredibly innocent. As the days went on, Zen would continue to meet with Atori. The two were the best of friends. Atori one day told Zen they put him on a night shift, so he wouldn't be able to hang out during the day anymore, and asked if Zen could hang out with him late at night. Mitsuhide had all the details on Atori, a young archer who at the time had started coming to the castle 4 months ago, and was about the same age as the prince. They met in secret because they each had to remember their respective places, but the look he had in his eyes at times seemed strange. Zen jump-scared Mitsuhide, since he was lost in thought on the whole matter. Switching the topic, Zen asked him how much a prince should distance himself from his people to protect his name and authority. Perhaps if he acted more like his brother, it would come natural to him. However, instead of accepting a response from Mitsuhide, he claimed his question to be rhetorical. One evening, Zen decided to sneak out of the castle to hang with Atori, only to be shocked to find him injured. And, oh no, this was an ambush. Mitsuhide then came to the rescue, learning these men who were with Atori had a bone to pick with Prince Izana. And so, the prince appeared. Izana commanded fear, demanding they state their names and business with him. Turns out, they were former nobles from one of the domain families who were stripped of their titles from overtaxing the people. Izana had no sympathy for them, knowing these were the kinds of people who would call themselves victims and beg their masters for scraps, the same kind who'd prey upon good people to line their own pockets, nothing more than worthless brigands. The thugs would then go on the advance, prompting Atori to finish off Zen while they got to work. However, they could have never imagined how threatening Izana was as he quickly slashed down one thug after another. Izana and Mitsuhide easily cut their opponents down. While they went on, Zen's innocence was being stripped before his very eyes. Learning Atori was pretending to be his friend the entire time, he claimed to have felt nothing but hatred and vengeance towards the Clarine's royalty. Zen begged his friend to stop, but Atori called their friendship laughable. Zen had warm rooms, delicious food, people who cared about him, and he smiled daily. Atori believed he only had these things because he was royalty. At that moment, Zen steeled his resolve, drawing his blade and admitting he was still figuring himself out. But while Atori fired his shot, Mitsuhide split the arrow in two and cut him down. while Izana killed their leader. Zen still sympathized with his friend, calling Atori's name over and over. And even though Atori knew Zen was sad, in his core, he still hated him. But that's where the words, "It might have been better if you weren't a prince," were first spoken to Zen, as Atori's eyes went hollow. That night, Zen didn't make a single sound as he cried. Having been reminded of that time, Zen knew people were always constantly yearning for concrete bonds with others. Walking along this path where his footsteps couldn't falter, he knew a force urging him onwards would one day rise from deep within his chest, and he looked forward to this. After Shirayuki woke up from her drunken slumber, Obi and the chief went to check up on her. The chief left Obi in charge while she went to finish her work, and when he tried to approach Shirayuki, she suddenly got up and started walking right past him. He followed her outside, and no matter how much he tried talking with her, she refused to answer but just continued to walk. She started to think about things, but then quickly became depressed because she didn't know how to ride a horse. Her being intoxicated really made her over the top. Obi tried asking why she needed a horse, and she quickly deflected to the classic, "Look, over there, it's Lord Haruka." But this of course didn't fool Obi at all. Obi then noticed someone was spying on them and pulled Shirayuki away. The man spying only took this down in his notes for a report, but tossing the report, Obi suddenly jumped out to intercept it and quickly got the spy, threatening him to spill who he was working for. After the man got taken away by the guards, Shirayuki went to check on Obi, but it was Obi who reminded her that people everywhere were determined to stick their noses in her life. He then wanted to know her opinion on how Zen approached his role as a prince, and in her opinion, she believed he fulfilled his role perfectly in his own way. He has an air of dignity and loves his country dearly and relies on Kiki and Mitsuhide. People take action because they're drawn to him. However, she questioned if her winning over the prince was a good thing. She was concerned, constantly being told that Zen would be ridiculed if she stayed near him. She knows she's allowed to be here, but didn't know how she should act while she was here. That's why she was so mad at herself. She was still concerned for the men at the fort Zen was relieved from seeing, but when she asked Zen about it, he told her everything would be fine as he tightly gripped her hand. She only blushed further at how cool he was. Obi then showed her she didn't need to worry about the fort, as he had been checking on it the last 2 days, even bringing her some gifts for her by Shuka. She read a detailed record of everyone's conditions there, and turns out they were all doing just fine. The fort men wanted to relay messages back to her. However, there were too many for Obi to remember, so he told her the easiest one, which was them saying, "We'll make sure to fulfill our duties as best as we can," in unison. Hearing this, Shirayuki's eyes glimmered as she stared up into the starry sky, reaffirming to herself that she needed to do the same. She thanked Obi, which really surprised him, but trying to walk forward, she suddenly fainted, and this would be the second time Obi caught her. He only remained at the castle because he thought everyone was interesting to watch, but seeing now that he was drawn to Shirayuki, he didn't feel he could leave anymore. Zen eventually got a note from Obi that he was bringing the drunken Shirayuki back to her room, so he went out to go find them. After Zen left, Mitsuhide stared at Atori's broken arrow Zen kept in his desk. A month after the incident, Mitsuhide gave it to him as a keepsake. Zen had admitted somewhere deep inside, he felt something was off about who he thought was his good friend. He wanted to trust Atori, and the memories only made him break down. Mitsuhide reminded Zen there would be people who he'd meet whom he could trust, but allowing his doubts to show wasn't going to help him gain anyone's trust. He advised him that rather than focus on protecting himself from enemies, he should first find out who his allies are. He should find out what to do as Clarine's prince, little by little, and he promised to stay by Zen's side and become a man that he could trust. Zen cried harder as Mitsuhide swore an oath to him, and in secret, Izana was listening in, pleased with how things were taking place. Zen then got up, acknowledging he wanted to become a man that someone would be proud to serve, and that he needed to become stronger first. Zen eventually reached Obi and Shirayuki, completely out of breath, touching her hair gently as he heard the details from Obi. Back in her room, the prince was taken aback hearing Shirayuki tried to head back to the snowy fort, even though she didn't know how to ride a horse. He then toasted to Obi's great work, and while they drank, he presented Obi an official identification badge to work in the palace. Obi was officially titled as a messenger for the second prince of Clarines. Zen truly placed his trust in him. During another day of doing her court herbalist duties, Shirayuki tried calling out to Ryu to head back, but he didn't hear her. Then, a woman named Kiharu called a blue bird down to Ryu. That way, he'd finally notice Shirayuki. It seems the bird responded quite well to Kiharu's whistle. Shirayuki went over to greet the girl, and we learned Kiharu had actually requested an audience with Prince Zen. We then learned Kiharu is from an island south of Clarines that is home to many birds just like hers named Popo. The birds on the island are known to have exceptional hearing, as they are able to find ore in the island's ocean just by listening to the way the waves sound. They can also find schools of fish easily, so the islanders often take the birds with them when they set sail. The whistle she has is made from ore found in their waters. The biggest problem they're facing right now is the island is under another territory's jurisdiction. A year and a half ago, a man, Viscount Blaker, who recently inherited his family's lands, brought some nobles with him to their island, and from then on, they made it a sport to shoot the birds. He would even gloat over it, saying, "These rare birds would fetch a high price." During one of their hunts, they even shot their arrows at Popo and injured him terribly. Kiharu tried telling them to stop many times, but her pleas fell on deaf ears. The Viscount then told her to ask the prince, and that he'd even take her to see him. She didn't have much hopes, thinking people of high status only belittled those with lower standings. Shirayuki tried assuring her Zen was nothing like that, but Kiharu was hysterical. Coming here was her only choice. Meeting with the prince, Zen understood that in order to prohibit hunting, Kiharu was requesting Nulis Island to be recognized as a natural reserve. Zen would discuss the matter with his people in the evening and planned to inform Kiharu of his decision tomorrow. However, based on accounts from Viscount Blaker, he believed this matter should be handled by the affected parties. This sent the Viscount into a rolling laughter, knowing he had the upper hand as he told Kiharu right in her face her pleas were worthless. Consulting with Mitsuhide and Kiki, Zen realized there wasn't much that could be done since the island didn't seem to have any valuable resources. From a political standpoint, it seemed like the Viscount could do as he pleased. But even so, he had a bad taste in his mouth being unable to help Kiharu, until Shirayuki made her entrance. Later that evening, Kiharu was granted a private audience with Zen, after he learned the bird could be signaled to fly anywhere she wanted with her whistle. The birds could even be sent out to boats on the open sea, using bells made from walnut stone that emitted distinct sounds. Now the prince had his edge. He could test to see if the birds could be used as a means of communication for Clarines. So, tomorrow evening, there'd be an official test for this. Kiharu asked Shirayuki to be the one to hold the bell, since she was the only person Kiharu could trust. The next day, Prince Zen declared the parameters of the test. 10 kilometers from the castle, there's a watchtower that would take about 40 minutes to reach on horseback. He wanted Popo to fly while carrying a document with him. Those on the watchtower deck will sign it and have the bird return with both the document and the bell, to be completed within a 25-minute time span. Seeing that Shirayuki was the one who proposed this to begin with, Viscount Blaker requested to go to the watchtower as well, to prevent any act of dishonesty for the test. Knowing this would be important for proof, Shirayuki and Zen nodded in agreement. After Shirayuki's side arrived at the tower, now was the time for the test to begin. But, of course, the Viscount guy was totally evil. At the top of the tower, he wanted to strike a deal with Shirayuki. He'd support her from the shadows and eventually elevate her social status to make it easier to be with Zen, as long as she allowed this test to fail. However, Shirayuki refused to back down, making the Viscount freak out, grab the bell, and toss it into the water below the tower. Shirayuki panicked watching it fall. Then, the Viscount grabbed her, locking Shirayuki in the tower room despite the castle guard telling him this wasn't right. She begged to be let out, but the Viscount had a motivation grounded in hubris. If the birds were found to be beneficial, he'd be regarded as ignorant for not realizing their prospects. Shirayuki didn't care one bit, opening the window and jumping right out, with Obi noticing her fall while climbing up the tower himself. In the water, she noticed she was bleeding from a scrape, and Obi jumped in to follow her along, but they needed to find the bell. Up top, the guard called for Viscount Blaker's arrest, saying no one serving under Prince Zen could ignore the determination Shirayuki had. A soldier eventually pointed out that the bird was hovering over a specific area in the water, so Shirayuki dove down, reaching towards the ore that sank to the bottom. Things were looking dire for Kiharu, since the test had only 2 minutes remaining, but hearing the bird calling out having retrieved the ore, Kiharu whistled and Popo arrived in an instant, presenting the document and bell. Haruka verified the document contained everyone's signatures, and thus, Prince Zen was able to recognize the carrier birds as an official means of communication, making it illegal to hunt them. Haruka then presented an additional report to Zen, and now learning what had transpired, Zen rushed over to the watchtower, concerned because Shirayuki was injured. Hearing the full report from one of the guards, Zen went right up the tower to see Shirayuki, and checking her injury, he was saddened he couldn't protect her. She promised she had no intention of hiding it, and as she smiled at him, Zen's eyes widened, seeing her radiance. He went right for a long kiss? In the aftermath of this, Shirayuki was frozen and flustered, so Zen apologized for not asking permission first. He decided the next time he wanted to touch her, he'd ask her beforehand, and wanted her to speak to him with honesty. She then nodded in silence, and heading back on horse, Obi could feel Shirayuki's hands burning up. All she could think of was Zen's voice calling her name, because it kindled a gentle warmth within her. But now, a flame, unlike any she'd ever felt, had blossomed in its place. A few days later, Kiharu was trying to calm down, freaking out that she'd be riding back to the island with the prince. When Zen arrived, Shirayuki refused to even look his way, trying to calm herself down while avoiding him. She then accidentally caught eyes with him, and proceeded to turn away, blushing into her book. When the gang took off, Obi was curious at what had happened to her back at the watchtower, but she denied anything, only finding an excuse to run off. Panting out of breath and hiding behind a corner, she wondered what was wrong with her. It's been 3 days. That should have been plenty of time to process all of this, but for some reason, she only got flustered and unable to speak properly seeing Zen's face. She didn't know how to tell him her true feelings. After a celebrity party at Euless Island, where the people absolutely adored Prince Zen, Mitsuhide met him privately out back as he looked out towards the sea. It was there. Mitsuhide asked if something was going on between him and Shirayuki. Zen gave a shocked expression, and then admitted they kissed after he initiated it. This definitely freaked Mitsuhide out, but now he wanted to know how she responded. Zen recalled receiving no answer at all, only that she looked surprised and her face was bright red. He knew his love for Shirayuki was always there, and when he touched her, he felt it ignite and glow brightly. He wanted her to know how he felt, as Prince of Clarines. Mitsuhide then rubbed his head, giving belief to his prince and dear friend. Back at the castle, Ryu told Shirayuki she could go home early, since she completed all her tasks for the day. However, she wanted to keep working to stop her mind from wandering, or thinking things. Ryu, who was extremely aloof, told her if something was wrong, she should probably write it out. That way she might be able to think better. Heading out, she realized she must be making others worry. She needed to snap out of it and work things out in her head. She desired to go out to the forest, and Obi escorted her there. Along the way, he kept looking at her hand, as if he wanted to hold it, but before he could reach out, Zen arrived, calling out to them. Obi quickly turned around, holding his hands up, feigning as if Shirayuki wasn't behind him. He even asked why she was hiding, and personally, she didn't know. She was just surprised. He could tell she was being serious, so he told her to run, and she sprinted straight forward towards the forest. Realizing something must be wrong, Zen got off his horse and went after her on foot. Shirayuki knew running was the most pointless thing she could have done, and with Zen approaching again, she kept running, admitting she didn't think she could face him right now. She stopped and apologized, but Zen had an apology as well, wondering if him asking her to speak openly about her feelings was too much. The sun started shining towards where they were standing, and Zen reminisced on when they had met near a forest area just like this. The two went for a walk, now visiting the place he used to hang out with at Tori long ago. This used to be a place he'd relax at often, but he eventually stopped coming here since he found the forests outside more breathtaking. He reconsidered that now though, with her being by his side, her presence and the breeze were nice. This is when Shirayuki thought to herself, hidden in the times she spent with Zen, hidden in the feelings she felt because of him. These unrealized emotions had always been there. She cried, saying, "I love you, Zen. You mean the world to me. I respect you and I want to be your strength. But now, I realize I've fallen in love with you as well. So, I want to look at you at the way that I always have. But I don't know if that's okay." Zen got up in response, stood in front of her and got on one knee. He told her he wanted the same. He knew his title as royalty may not be able to protect her, and he didn't know if he could ever repay everything she's done for him. Even so, he wanted them to continue being together. He told her, "I wish that you would always be by my side. I swear, upon this meeting, that I will protect what we have with my very soul. But to do that, he still needed her help. She gave him strength, after all. He then asked her to take his hand, and she did, with the two of them now kneeling face to face. There's something Zen had been thinking for a long time. Realizing his status could constrain things, he once asked Mitsuhide if he found the person he loved, and said person responded to his feelings. Would he even believe their sincerity? Or would he doubt them and think the woman he loved had said it because they had to? He really struggled with whether or not he'd believe someone he loved would really love him. But now finding Shirayuki, he was in tears because he finally found her. Embracing each other, the two kissed under the warmth of the sunlight, and returned together happily, knowing the memory of this would give them strength. We moved to a special public visitation day at the castle. That happens once every few years. The people come to visit, but the court herbalists must continue their work as per usual. Shirayuki hopes Zen is having fun, but accidentally stumbling onto a crowd of people, Zen, disguised as a castle guard, pulls her aside, and now having some private time, he explains he wanted to watch the citizens as well as the people working on the grounds. But also, he was hoping to see her, and spend time, just the two of them alone, making her so lost in thought, she accidentally dropped her book. They both reached down for it, and she only got more flustered with them still holding hands. However, Zen was annoyed to see Obi and Mitsuhide interrupting their romantic time. Since the gang was all here, he decided they could all visit the castle grounds together. Shirayuki was in awe seeing all the stalls. Today was much like a festival, where many vendors had come to share their wares from neighboring towns. With the crowd being even bigger than earlier, Shirayuki decided to cover her hair, wanting to be more discreet. While enjoying the sight of some performers, Mitsuhide told her something Zen had said to him personally the other day, about how he wanted to find a path that lets him be here with her. And Mitsuhide was so happy Zen was honest about his feelings. In kind, Shirayuki wanted the same. Elsewhere, Obi was winning a prize fight, taking on the alias Nanaki whenever he does tournaments like these. However, Zen scolded him for running off on his own. Zen and his aides ended up taking off because he had business to attend to, and in the time they were gone, Obi put an accessory in Shirayuki's hair. It was from a foreign land, and part of the prize he won from the fight. The crowd was cheering as the two Clarine's princes presented themselves. As Shirayuki stared at him from below, she thought about how they'd always run into each other in the castle, and in those times he'd leave behind assurance that he'd be there for her, with his voice or a touch. Looking at him like this though, she felt more aware of how far apart they were in status. But despite that, he always closed the distance. Later, at a play, Shirayuki and Ryu had been called to treat an actress who injured her foot. The actress wanted to get back on stage. However, Ryu told her that wasn't possible because her foot was fractured. Hearing the bad news, the actress was upset because she desired the play to be a success. That way, they could have put on a show for the princes. She wanted to stand on a grand stage and make a name for herself in Clarine's. Shirayuki reassured her that things would be fine, lightening the mood. And when she lifted her hood, revealing her hair, the director begged Shirayuki to take the actress's place as the princess. After getting changed, the prince was stun-locked, seeing Shirayuki in her beautiful costume. While she took her place on stage, the director prompted the prince character to lift her hood, in his scheme to ascend their play to the next level by unveiling a hair color never seen before. But Prince Zen wasn't going to let that happen. Rushing up the stairs and jumping from the top of the stage in disguise, he played the part of a masked knight who was going to rescue her. He then had a sword duel with the prince actor, giving Shirayuki time to escape. He was doing what he could to protect her red hair and any potential kiss from another man. Watching the play, Shirayuki felt Zen was always letting his actions speak loudly. They spoke for his feelings and passions, and meant so much to her. After the play ended successfully, she and Zen chatted privately on some stairs, and after unveiling her hair and seeing the decorative pin, Zen felt somewhat annoyed at Obi. He did think it looked good on her, however, so she decided to keep it on. The two had a meaningful conversation about her upbringing. Having been raised by her grandparents, she was taught from a young age to work hard at things she wanted to do. She then asked Zen to hold out his hand, that way she could kiss it. This certainly surprised him, but she was glad to be who she was. The two both became a little flustered, but then, hearing a crowd cheer, they stepped outside to see floating lanterns. Apparently, this was a tradition on public visitation day, where people would make a wish and send them up to the sky. The two decided to head down and see the beautiful lanterns floating up close. Looking at them with Zen, Shirayuki wondered how many more of these peaceful days were in store for them in the future. But no matter what happened, she was resolute on moving forward. What a nice ending to this tale about walking on one's own path. Subscribe to the channel for more, and also let me know if you want me to cover Season 2. Watch this next video. It's me, ComfyTea. I'll see you all in the next one.